was another memorable weekend of European action as Munster secured another memorable away victory against Toulon. Elsewhere, Leinster were easy winners against Stade Francais, while it was disappointment for Connacht and Ulster as they came out on the end of heavy defeats against Lyon and Toulouse. All of that sets up an intriguing final round of Champions Cup pool action, and then we will know the identity of the knockout fixtures to come in the new year. So plenty to talk about on tonight's episode of the Left Wing podcast. We are also going to get to the shock news that Lewis Rees-Salmon has quit rugby and is pursuing a career in the NFL. Plenty to come on tonight's show. Glad to be joined by Cian, Tracey and Luke Fitzgerald. And Cian, we might start with that Munster victory. It kind of was a tantalising glimpse into what might have been for their European campaign. I think they've had 10-point leads in the second half of all three of their matches. They finally got a win on the board at the weekend, playing some really good stuff. What impressed you the most about their performance?
Yeah, you're trying not to use the cliches when it comes to Munster, but it really was classic Munster. Even when myself and Sinead were chatting on Friday's podcast, I was making the point that, you know, you would be a fool to write them off. And even though the odds probably were stacked against them, Toulon don't lose too often at home. They picked a really meaty team. I thought the manner in which Munster fronted up, I think, was the most impressive thing. The quality of tries that they scored was seriously good. I know we're going to get stuck into that. I mean, you can't really ignore the difference that someone like Peter O'Mahony makes coming back. I mean, the line out was much more assured. I think over the last few weeks since he's been missing, Munster have been lacking a bit of leadership. It's a point I've made to you guys on the pod as well. And you just see that guys feed off, I think, the confidence and the energy that he brings. But I also thought a guy like Niall Scannell, who, you know, maybe has become the forgotten man a little bit at Munster. He's been overtaken in the pecking order by a guy like Diarmuid Barron at hooker. But coming in for his first game of the season, I thought he was outstanding. And then when you had Niall Scannell and Peter O'Mahony there, it just made such a big difference to Munster's line-out. But they packed a punch, I thought, in their carries, in their defence, the amount of turnovers that they forced from Toulon, which, look, Toulon were quite sloppy with the ball, I thought, but that was down to the pressure that they were being put under by Munster's defence. So it was a serious feather in the cap, I think, for Dennis Leamy's defence. Like, they had a couple of big moments. I think the moment just before half time where their maul comes up trumps, like a maul that's been under severe pressure, you'd have to say this season. It's been a bit of a weakness for them, but again, you have to take into account the amount of players and the calibre of players that they've been missing. But to hold out Toulon just before half time in an area that had been weak, I thought must have given them huge confidence going into the second half, obviously recovering from being 10-0 down. And once the game goes into the final quarter, then you're kind of getting a bit of deja vu. I was over in Exeter before Christmas, you know, and I was telling you guys, I basically had my match report written coming up to about the hour mark and had to quickly rewrite it. And you were kind of hoping that Munster weren't going to make the same mistakes twice, and they didn't. They showed good composure to see out the victory. And like you said, Will, it breathes life back into their campaign.
Yeah, it was kind of I had mixed feelings because I was so impressed with their victory. And even the last couple of weeks, I was still kind of taking maybe a slightly glass half full approach to their European collapses because of the quality of the tries they were scoring, the rugby they were playing. But they could easily be 15 points out of 15 going into the final round and jockeying for that first or second seeding, which can give you home advantage all the way through. Obviously, they're not, but they still look on course for the knockout stages. Luke, what stood out to you? It was important to get the result because it was the results of that were really lacking over the last 6-7 weeks. Performances were okay in patches, but they didn't really have many wins. So that's vital to get that on the board.
What struck me when I was thinking about the game, you know, in kind of breaks and play, I just kind of thought, Cian's kind of touching it, like in the pack, the impact Scannell and O'Mahony had. But they're senior players, you know, guys kind of with experience. I thought Zebo had a very good game. He was pretty assured. Obviously, that great moment for the try, which we'll discuss. But I thought the two signings as well, like, you know, Frisch and I think Nankivell were very, very good throughout the game as well. So, like, I think, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the transfer policies and contracts and all this kind of stuff in Munster. I actually think the senior players and the guys they brought in actually made a massive difference in that game. And yeah, that was probably the lasting thought I had about the game. Just a kind of a stray thought maybe. I think as well that they clung in there really well, which I think was a bit of a feature of some of their games at the end of last season as well, when they went through that successful period. Just when you think a team is getting on top of them, they pull off a big turnover. Like, it doesn't seem like Tyke Byrne does, like, he had a few kind of messy moments, but God, when they need him, and for Ireland too, when you need that guy, he really stands up and has big moments. Whether it was ripping the ball out of guys' hands, or the ball just seems to be, he seems to attract the ball defensively. You know, that kind of way. It's a weird thing to say. You normally say that about a player in attack who gets tries. You know, like one of those guys on a try scoring record. Just the ball always seems to fall the right way, or whatever. Defensively, at key moments, he seems to be in the right place when someone makes an error, or he's there to pounce when someone, you know, when there's an opportunity. So he's so important for Munster and for Ireland. And they were kind of my thoughts on the game. I just thought all those people had big impacts on the game and big moments throughout that saw them through. And I think O'Mahony's impact can't be understated. I think he just brings a sense of calmness to the team. I think he's a battle-hardened guy, up for the fight, all the time. And I think what he gives you at line out as well, it just really, it fleshes out that line out, if you like. It makes him, particularly defensively, it's talked about a lot, but geez, he's a nightmare. He must be a nightmare to throw against, Will. So all of those factors, I think, got them over the line. And I think they should go through the group. Like, they're too good not to. I know they have the injury woes, but you know, it'd be a complete mess if they didn't get through. And they've kind of nearly already made a mess of this thing, but they should go through it at the very least. This Munster team, I think, is in a good place when they have all the bodies on deck. I still think there's work to be done in the front row, but everywhere else in the pitch, despite losing, you know, Earls and Conway, I think this team is in a good place and ready to kick on. So it would have been an absolute travesty if they didn't even get through to the qualification part of the competition, which it looks like they should be able to do now.
Yeah, and I know they won't have home advantage in the knockout stages most likely, but like, they won't fear going to a number 2 seed who won't likely be one of the big beasts of the competition. It would be a good team, but you know, beating a strong Toulon team away shows that they can go, and they almost beat Exeter, and they should have beaten Exeter probably away from home too. We know their road kind of exploits last year ended up winning them the URC, so they'll be very confident going on the road. Cian, Luke touched on a few players there, but what did you make of Jack Crowley's performance? I think he ended up getting player of the match, but first 20 minutes was a rocky start, 10-0 down. He had one kick out in the full, a loose kick that Toulon ran back for a great try, counter-attacking try. But from then on, he really kind of put his stamp on the game. A few lovely kicks. Obviously, the Simon Zebo try was a brilliant bit of play, and a lovely cross kick, I think, for the Ahern try as well. It's a great kind of proving moment for him, especially with, going to Marseille 2 weeks' time, most likely, near Toulon, so it'll be a familiar part of the world. But I think that was a massive step forward in his career. I know he's already won the league, but to kind of wrestle back the momentum in an away day like that and deliver them to victory, I think is a huge step forward.
Yeah, you've basically taken the words out of my mouth, Will. Like, in a weird way, I think, especially because Munster came through and got the win, I don't think it's any harm for Jack Crowley to have like a tricky experience, I think it's fair to say, because the mental resilience he showed to bounce back from the errors was seriously impressive. Like, I've spoken to him a good few times over the years, even when he was coming through under 20s, and he doesn't strike me as a guy who is arrogant or is going to get ahead of himself. But that kind of performance and the errors that he made is probably just a little reminder that he does have a way to go. And like I said, I don't think he thinks at all like he's the finished article, and neither do supporters. But it was a nice little wake up call. Is a little bit strong, but it was a nice audition, like you said, Will, because what he's going to face in Marseille in a couple of weeks is going to be quite similar, because if he kicks loosely like he did for that Toulon try, Damien Penaud and Louis Bray-Baray are going to absolutely shred the defence. So you'd rather him learn the lesson now and the fact that Munster came through and won the game rather than costing Ireland a potential Six Nations victory in a couple of weeks. But I mean, the mental resilience was the one thing that really stood out, and that's the thing that you constantly hear about him. When he's in around camp, how much of a vocal leader he is, but also how much of a sponge he is. And like, when he did get it right at the weekend, God, it was so impressive. That kick for Simon Zebo's try was just absolutely beautiful. The kick for Tom Ahern, which they've obviously been trying a few times this season, was just brilliant as well. And even in the build up to the Tom Ahern try, he had thrown a loose pass, if memory serves, in the build-up as well. So I think it says a lot about a young guy's character in a pivotal position. And he knows that this is a huge few weeks for him. We were down in Limerick before Christmas for the Exeter game, chatting to him. And, I was asking, is the Six Nations on his mind? Because like the man in the street, I think, would accept that Jack Crowley, injury permitting, is going to be starting in Marseille. But, he said that it's not. But of course, he wants to be starting. But he wouldn't be human if he isn't thinking about that, So it is a huge, huge few weeks in his career. And I thought that was a big test that he passed, albeit it wasn't perfect. And if we're being honest, I was probably a little bit surprised that he got man of the match. I think there were a couple of other Munster players. Luke mentioned a couple, I mentioned a couple, like Nankerville I thought was outstanding. Peter O'Mahony, Tygburn, Niall Scannell. But look, that's neither here nor there. He was probably a little bit surprised himself. I presume it was the French picking it. We know they like a good out half. And he did have a good impact on the game. So it was a good test, I think, for him.
Yeah, I actually switched it over to the other game that was on at the same time for the last 10 minutes or so because Munster had it in hand. And I presume Donegal O'Callaghan had picked it because he was doing the commentary on BT Sport. And it was also Jack Crowley's birthday as well. So, a nice way to cap the 24th birthday. Luke, what did you make of his performance, especially with a view to that big game in France in 2 weeks' time?
Yeah, I just like him. I think he's kind of a guy who doesn't get too flustered if he makes mistakes. You have to have... Yeah, it's a weird thing to say, but you kind of have to have a short memory, I think, when it comes to those things. Certainly have to get the learnings from them, but I do think you have to be able to move on. And he seems mentally strong enough to be able to do that and go ahead and perform kind of, basic tasks. He's a guy, I like him a lot because I love how defensively sound he makes you. He's up for the fight. He's got a break as well, which I think is a big advantage he probably holds over Ross Burns, that he has that yard of pace and he's kind of hard to tackle. So alongside, I think he probably is a better defender than him too. So yeah, I like him a lot. I think he's got a big game mentality. He sees the big moments too. We know that from the drop kick last year. And I thought he recovered really well, which is a really good sign. And what was definitely a difficult match for Munster at times. I do think, he can... The bigger moments, so you could see, we're going to talk about our moments there, but that try for Zebo, I think, was a really good example of a guy, I think, who can still analyse the situation, even though he had probably, he'd made a mistake from kind of trying a bit of a loose kick earlier on. He still was able to have the confidence to go, okay, I've got the call in from Zebo, because you can see Zebo calling to him as he's moving into position, which we're going to talk more about later on, which is just so nice how he disguises that as from a winger's perspective. But for Crowley to have gone, okay, we're in a good position here, we've got momentum in the 22, but I'm still going to kick it away because it's the right option. So trusting the call, but then you've got to see it and execute it. And it was executed so well. I think that's a big game player to me. That's a guy who trusts his ability and trusts what he sees and being able to deliver, and execute on where the opponents are weak. So yeah, I think he's definitely at the forefront for a couple of weeks' time. I think everyone knows that at this stage, particularly with Ross Byrne going down and Frawley going down as well. So I think really excited to see now what he can produce, provided he, of course, he stays injury-free. We're praying he stays injury-free at this stage. That would be an absolute nightmare. But I just like him. I think he looks like a guy who's built for international rugby, and I think he's got a great future ahead of him without putting too much pressure on him. I still think out half at international there is a big learning curve. There's a big learning curve. The danger is that we're heaping praise on him for these kind of magic moments, whereas I think being a great international 10 isn't really about looking for those moments. Those moments will come to you. And I think, you need to be able to execute. He can do it. We know he can do it. But has he got the cool head to say 95% of my decisions are the basic ones? I'm going to use these 14 brilliant players, international rugby players that are around me, and I'm going to guide them around the pitch. And those big moments, I trust they'll come to me and I'll be able to execute. I think he looks like he's able to do that. And I'm very excited to see him make the next push in his career to the next level.
Yeah, Cian was obviously very positive on the pitch for Munster the weekend. Subsequent to the match, obviously, a lot of kind of reports around Peter O'Mahony's future. It appears he's be moving off his IRFU contract. There's kind of an impasse about whether, his new Munster deal, I think it's up at the end of the season. His future's a bit up in the air at the moment. Like, what's your read on the situation at the moment? Like, do you think it's actually a live possibility that Peter O'Mahony leaves?
I think it is, because coming off an IRFU central contract is complicated for many different reasons. Munster are obviously going to have to stump up the cash, and for a guy who, the Six Nations squad is going to be announced tomorrow. It might already have been announced by the time some people get to listen to this. But he's certainly, I would say, in the conversation to be the next Ireland captain for at least the next year or two. And look, we haven't got to obviously chat to him or see him over the last few weeks because he's been injured. But I don't know, there has been some talk behind the scenes that maybe that impacted his decision to give up the Munster captaincy, which is very strange the more you think about it. The fact that he did come back from the World Cup and captained Munster, I think it was against the Stormers, off the top of my head, and then decided all of a sudden that he wasn't going to be Munster captain anymore. So it'll be nice to get a chance to eventually sit down with him and get his thoughts about, what's going on there. But the brass tacks of it, Will, is I don't think Munster can afford to lose him. We've just discussed how important he remains to Munster. Like, it was no coincidence that Munster pulled that performance, like a typical classic away performance, out of the bag when Peter O'Mahony was back in the team. I think there's been a lack of leadership when he's not there. Luke has touched on, his line-out prowess, and I still think he offers Munster and Ireland a hell of a lot, and he probably still does as well. And maybe I'm only guessing, but he might think that he deserves to get another central contract, and that might be complicating issues, but I'm obviously only speculating about that. But if he is coming off the central contract, which will expire at the end of the season, then in my mind, Munster have to do everything they can to keep him. I don't know there's going to be cash freed up from RG Snyman's salary. I think in an ideal world, they would have liked to have spent that, and they probably still do, on a front row. But the other issue as well, which hasn't really cropped up as much, is that Conor Murray is also apparently coming off a central contract. So when that happens, again, it means that Munster are the ones who are going to have to absorb their salary. And that's a lot of cash to come up with for two vastly experienced guys, and two guys who I think Conor Murray is still a very important player for Munster as well. So I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility, Will, that he could leave. Do I think it will happen? No, because I think Munster will, if they haven't already, will see sense and realise that they have to keep this guy at the province. He's only 34. I know he's got plenty of miles on the clock, but like I said, he's a guy who's in the conversation to be the next Ireland captain. I think that speaks volumes for the quality that he still has left in him.
Yeah, I think surely an agreement can be reached. I remember when Simon Zebo came back, it was announced that it was like a kind of an IRFU Munster hybrid kind of deal that had been worked out. Because like Peter O'Mahony, obviously, as you say, 34, is he going to be as relevant for Ireland in 2 years' time as he is now? Probably not, but he is now, as you say, going to be a key part of the Six Nations. Like, Andy Farrell is going to be stepping aside, for a period next season. You'd imagine Peter O'Mahony's leadership, provided he's still playing well, will be vital there. I think he's still important for both club and country in the medium term. Long term, maybe not. He would be 38 at the next World Cup, or just about to turn 38. Well, Luke, what's your perspective on it? I think I'd be shocked if he ends up leaving. I think this is just classic negotiations. The thought of Peter O'Mahony leaving Munster and playing in France, I think, will get everyone very excited. And I think ultimately a deal will be hammered out. But what's your perspective, having obviously been at the negotiating table as a player as well?
Yeah, well, I think that, look, at the end of the day, I think the bottom line is what really speaks the most, and I think it will be a shame for Munster, or it is a shame for Munster now that they're going to have to dig into their own coffers, but they've been able to do that. And I know they have some kind of benefactor behind the scenes there who has been able to help them out along the way, someone who's kind of passionate about Munster rugby and has been able to support them. This, to my mind, seems like the ideal scenario for someone like that to kind of step in and go, hold on a second here, do we want to see this guy finishing his career not in a red jersey? I think everyone, down in Munster would be of the same opinion, thinking, well, no, absolutely not. We'd love to see this guy finish out here, particularly when he's still adding so much value. To my mind, he's the obvious choice for the Irish captaincy too. I think he is a perfect, because there's no real standout candidate, in my opinion, at this juncture. And I think it would be no harm to give everyone else just another year where they don't have that pressure. So like whether James Ryan emerges, his age, he is a better age profile. Does Dan Sheehan continue to grow in that jersey? Is he a guy, because he's a cert starter, has had a pretty good injury profile so far as well. There's lots of guys. Ringrose, maybe, would we like to see more of him there? I think there's a real obvious candidate is yet to emerge, and I think another year looking at this thing would be absolutely no harm. And I think Peter O'Mahony would be the perfect guy for this year. And then you reassess next year. If he's still playing great, then you say, yeah, we do it for another year. And someone hasn't emerged. So to my mind, this is actually a really important decision for Irish rugby and for Munster rugby to make. And I just think he's playing brilliant rugby. It comes down to that. And he still looks to me like he's in great shape. He hasn't lost a yard of pace, I don't think. He still looks like he's got great spring when it comes to the lineouts. And I think even if he has lost a little bit of spring, what he's learned from, looking at so many lineouts over the course of a 13, 14 year professional rugby career, hanging around Paul O'Connell for that amount of time. If he has lost a bit of spring, he's made up for it in experience and know-how. And I just think he's a key guy for Munster and for Ireland in the short term. Now, I know we all want to be thinking about the long term and how who are we contracting? Why are we contracting? And we look at the likes of, say, in sports, you look at Man United and the absolute mess they've made of it. This isn't one of those things. You're talking about a 1 year, 2 year period where this guy still looks like he's at the top of his game and is still the number one choice, I think, in the Irish jersey at this point in time. I still have him as my number one going into that Six Nations game against France, in Marseille. So yeah, I think it's an important one. I think he's still playing great, and I'd be signing this guy up 100% to another 2 year contract. I think you need to just come up with the money outside of it. I think the bottom line will speak for him. If he can get past the number or get to the number that he was getting on the central contract, this should be a done deal for all parties, unless there's a massive offer from abroad, which, there may still come. I think that I see Ulster Delan might be leaving La Rochelle. That might be a sneaky little destination there. If he can wangle a couple of quid out of Raj, that's another another possibility for him. And obviously his wife, speaks French. She's Belgian, I think. So, or she has a Belgian background, so I think she speaks fluent French. That would be an easy move for them, I think. So yeah, look, that's the situation. That's the lay of the land at the moment. So, watching closely. I hope they make the right decision for club and country.
It was interesting. Last week we were at the Guinness Rugby Writers Awards, and Andy Farrell was speaking on behalf of Ireland, won the Team of the Year award. And I'm conscious that this could be out of date by the time some people get to listen to it when the squad being named. But I fully agree with Luke. I think Peter O'Mahony would be a great choice as captain, because it doesn't have to be a 4 year cycle. And Andy Farrell made this point in his acceptance speech that he hates the talk of 4 year cycles. And he also made a very interesting point, I thought. He basically said, he was asked, how he's feeling about this slate being wiped clean for the Six Nations. Johnny Sexton is gone. And he basically said, the slate isn't being wiped clean at all. This is a continuation of the work that we've done for the last 4 years. This is just the next stage of that. And I loved that, because I know the World Cup didn't work out according to plan, but Ireland have such a strong body of work behind them. And that's clearly the mentality that Farrell wants to instill in them, that this isn't a fresh start per se. So if you were going by that logic, I think there's a lot to be said for Peter O'Mahony as a kind of a continuity captain, for want of a better term. Not that he hasn't earned it, because I think he would. And because, again, I agree with what Luke said, because there's no outstanding candidate. I mean, I think even the fact that Leinster picked co-captains this season wasn't, I think, a great reflection probably on James Ryan's, captaincy, because for years, I think a lot of people thought that he would be the next captaincy, but there's nothing to say that he couldn't come in, again, like Luke said, after a year or two of Peter O'Mahony doing it. Because if we're getting out of the kind of 4 year World Cup cycle and maybe viewing it like in 2 years, then the landscape could have changed in 2 years' time. Peter O'Mahony might not be guaranteed his place in the team yet. And you could have a guy like James Ryan, Gary Ringrose, Caelan Doris, Ian Henderson, I don't know, whoever it is, but they could pick up the slack then. I think that would be a very clever way to go. But I suppose we'll see which way Farrell goes with it tomorrow. But because there's no obvious candidate, I think Peter O'Mahony would do a great job.
Well, his return from injury was perfectly timed, and getting that big performance and the big result, that you saw how much of a difference he made in such a key match. Like, we've seen other contracts given out to various players in the latter half of their career, and they haven't been playing well, and people have maybe rightly been questioning whether they are value for money. But when you come in and impact a game like he did at the weekend, I think you can definitely argue that he does deserve it. So that'll be fascinating to see over the next couple of weeks what way that contract situation is resolved. Luke, we might move on to Leinster now. Obviously beating Stade Francais on Saturday. Once the teams were named, there was only going to be one winner. Stade Francais obviously rested the majority of their team. Leinster picked pretty much their full team. Were you happy with the performance from a Leinster perspective? Like, again, I kind of left feeling that they left a lot of meat on the bone there. Like, coughed up a lot of chances, ended up scoring 6 tries. But as Bernard Jackman kind of said afterwards, I thought he put it well. Like, that should have been 60 points given the team Leinster picked and who they were playing, probably. But their execution, I thought, was just a little bit off again.
Yeah, they look a little apprehensive, look like they're overrunning each other, look like they're just a little bit muddled in some of the attacking thinking. I still have my concerns about them defensively, if I'm being honest. I think they got opened up by a few kicks at different points in the game as well, by a pretty average Stad team, So I think... look, that 14 weeks is in my mind. I'm not sure how wise it was to give a number, if I'm being completely honest. I love that he was forthright about the timing of that. I think it's more about the timing of that. He expects to get it right in qualification time, but in knockout rugby time. But yeah, they look muddled to me. I'm not mad on the defence and how it looks at this juncture. I thought there were some good moments. If you get on top of a team and you can kind of push them back into areas that you like, you can really put pressure on them. But I think, it was quite clear Stad didn't care about the game because they didn't look at how Ulster opened Leinster up at all the week before. The inside passes, from the pods, the short kicking game, the chipping games, the crossfield kicks. In fairness, they did try a few of them, even though there's a few wobbly ones as well. There was a bit of a game plan I thought that Ulster had. Now, I know the conditions were crap, but I think that might have been worse for Leinster if the conditions were good, if I'm being honest. They looked like they had a really nice game plan about how they were going to deal with this pressure defence. And I do think Leinster still look frantic and out of control in the tackle zone. So they're trying really, really hard to get off the line. You can see what they're trying to do, but they are not accurate enough when it comes to tackle time. And I'm watching them a lot. I'm talking to some of the ex-players as well, guys who I really respect on it, about the defensive side of things. And they weren't as strong as me on it, but I still think the tackle technique is they look wild. They look out of control in the tackle area. Some of the hits are brilliant to see. They're big hits, but they're not getting enough of the normal tackles, like the ones that that you're not emptying a guy. They're not getting enough of those ones right. They're slipping off way too many tackles. They look out of control in the area to me. So I still think there's a lot of ground for them to cover. I think better teams will get on top of them. I think they'll be able to pick them apart. And I think they need to work on their tackle technique. It sounds like a really basic thing, but I just feel like they're not focused on that area at all. They're only focused about getting off the line. And I think they look out of control. They look like there's opportunities to open them up. And everyone's going to talk about the attack and that not functioning unbelievably well. I'm less concerned about that. I think there's been a lot of change at 10. And I think, they've guys coming back in who are kind of key to them. It's the first time we've seen James Lowe this year. Jimmy O'Brien's obviously out. So there's a bit of that going on with Leinster as well. So I think the attack will get, they'll fix that. I'm not concerned about that. I'm really concerned about how this defence will look. I caught a bit of the La Rochelle game, not all of it. I just couldn't watch all the rugby in the weekend in time. So I only saw the highlights. But La Rochelle will pick that apart. I guarantee you, because if you miss that many one-on-one tackles against them, no matter how hard you're coming off the line and where the hits are taking place, they will pick you apart. You have to have brilliant tackle technique alongside this, is my opinion. So that's the area that's concerning me the most, Will. And I do think as well, the kicking, their kick defence, like Gibson Park got a load of praise for that covering across, for that kick that went through. But he was dead late to see the danger as well. Like, he was, like, everyone, that was brilliant. How hard did he have to work? How hard did he have to work hard because he didn't move early enough and see that there was a massive gap behind that Leinster defence. So I think that's been a real recurring theme. I thought Sale picked them apart there. I thought Ulster really picked them apart in the kicking game as well. I'm concerned about that part of the game. I think against the better teams and the bigger teams that they'll get opened up. And they've been opened up by way lesser teams the last couple of weeks, So that was what I left the game thinking. Not convinced at all yet.
Yeah, and it's not just La Rochelle. If you saw Toulouse against Ulster and Bordeaux against Saracens, like absolutely shredding teams, especially what Bordeaux did to Saracens, a team who we obviously aren't what they were, but not like God. Bordeaux put 55 points on them and looked very good doing it. Keane, you were at the Aviva, so you'll have your own perspective on things. Like, is there anything that Luke said there or that you noticed yourself in particular that jumped out to you?
Yeah, it's clearly still a work in progress, but surely we have to allow them time. They didn't have any preseason with Jack Nienaber, so he's trying to change a whole system during the season, which is obviously difficult. And these are high caliber players we're talking about, and it is going to take some time. And I think that's why he came out a couple of weeks ago and said the 14-week thing, because that's what happened, he said, with South Africa. That's what happened with Munster. And I think the players seem to, well, at least they're telling us publicly anyway, that they are actually enjoying the challenge of getting up to speed with it. In terms of the work in the contact area, to be fair, Leinster have put a big focus on that over the last few years. They had Hugh Hogan there as contact skills coach. They had Dennis Leamy, and obviously Sean O'Brien is in there now. So there's no excuse for the contact kind of area to be as sloppy in terms of what Luke's saying about the tackle tech, because they have a designated coach in Sean O'Brien doing that. So that would maybe be a little bit more of a concern than the systematic stuff, which I do think will come. It was interesting. We were chatting to James Lowe yesterday, and trying to get his perspective, because obviously he had trouble when he moved over in the first place in terms of getting to grips with the Irish system, and this is obviously all new for him as well. But the vibe seems to be that once they get to grips with it, that they will be fine. And the question was put to him, what will it be like when you go into Ireland camp over the next couple of weeks? Because you don't exactly play a blitz defence as hard and aggressive as this. And if you think of the amount of Leinster players that are going to be in that Ireland team in France, so I'm fascinated to see how Andy Farrell and Simon Easterby go about getting that balance right. But I think they will get it right. Whether they get it right in time to win this season, I suppose, is the big question. But I thought they did a lot of stuff well at the weekend. Now, everything I say from here on in is obviously with the caveat that Stade were really, really poor. But I thought a lot of Leinster's big players, stepped it up a notch. You could tell that the Six Nations is just around the corner. I thought Gary Ringrose was very good, Caelan Doris, Joe McCarthy. I thought Gibson Park had played well for a while he was on as well. And I thought the quality of some of the tries that they scored were really good, again, against a poor defence. But Luke's right, they looked a bit frazzled when they had that early try for Dan Sheehan disallowed for Ryan Baird, gave away a penalty, and Ryan Baird was exceptional as well. That was a rare blip for him. But I thought their attack actually looked a lot better. And because we're focusing so much on the defence, obviously, because Nienaber has come in, it's worth remembering as well that Andrew Goodman wasn't there all pre-season either, because he was off with Samoa at the World Cup. So it has been a really disrupted period building into the season for Leinster. Again, Luke is right, touching on the amount of change that they've had at 10. That's a factor as well. But allowing for it was a poor defence, I didn't think it was a coincidence that Leinster's attack, I thought, looked a lot slicker when the weather was better. They've been playing in crap weather over the last few weeks, so is everyone else. It's not really an excuse, but to score 7 tries, and they did leave a lot behind them, you're right, Will, but I thought they looked a lot slicker than they have been. But I suppose this weekend against Leicester will be a much tougher test.
Yeah, I think what stood out to me, I think the attack has been functioning, reasonably well. It's their kind of chance conversion that's been really kind of jarring to me. I feel like they need 3 really good chances to score a try now. I mentioned Bordeaux earlier, Toulouse and La Rochelle as well at the weekend. Any sniff they got, I'd say it was 9 out of 10 try scoring opportunities taken for all 3 teams, and they're the 3 other big teams at the moment in terms of form line. Obviously, Northampton have been good, but in a weaker pool. It's just kind of like knock-ons around the lines, uncharacteristic penalties near the line. I feel like they're opening teams up. They're not converting as many opportunities. As you said, Leicester will be an interesting test. I know they were trashed by La Rochelle, but they'll have a few more frontline players back, and they are at home. Albeit Leinster have put them away pretty comprehensively the last 2 seasons, but that'll be a bigger step up. But yeah, that's one thing that stood to me. Look, I want to ask you, I'll ask both of you a question, but we got a question from a listener, Oliver, who's asking, if Leinster don't win a trophy this year, it would be 3 years without a trophy. Would that be Leo Cullen's last season as Leinster head coach, do you think?
Oh, No, I don't think so. I think he's done an unbelievable job. Like, I think if you think about how close they have been, and you think about how, like, I think a lot of when I think about the how the team play on the pitch, I don't think about Leo as much. I know he's director of rugby, but I think about, when I think about Leo, I'm more thinking about the kind of resources and what he's putting on the pitch, and how he's like, is the place run well? Is it a happy camp? Um, yes, I know he has some involvement in the team and the selections and that, but I haven't seen, like, I would have had that as Lancaster kind of. Maybe it's wrong, because I'm always saying Leo should be getting more credit. But no, I don't think so. I think he's done a brilliant job. I think the team have been in positions to go ahead and deliver, but have kind of let themselves down, I think. And I think some of the coaching points probably, which I feel like he's probably not as involved on. He's kind of maybe not one step removed, but half a step removed from lots of the things, the issues that I feel like they've been having. I think he's probably one step removed from, or half a step removed from those things. So no, I don't think that I would be saying that. Because I think he has to deal with a lot of issues this year. I think, the coaches coming in late is obviously a big thing. Sexton obviously moving on is another big thing that they have to kind of deal with. So certainly would warrant another year after this one, I think, to give him at least a full season with the kind of coaches and that. So yeah, I don't know. I think that sounds like a bit of a premature one. I think maybe I'm not a great person to ask on this one either, because I would definitely be biased in Leo's camp. But I would think that he's done a brilliant job. I don't think. I think the team have probably been, the issue and how they performed in the final days. But I suppose, does a coach share responsibility for that too? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too biased. I don't know, guys. I'd be looking for. I would think Leo's doing a brilliant job, if I'm being completely honest. I think he was obviously heavily involved in recruiting Nina Bar. That's a brilliant bit of business too. So he has pull. He has. I think what he's done with the resources has been brilliant too. So I think I would continue on with him. I think he's been brilliant for the club, and he's a stalwart there. So no, I wouldn't be calling for any kind of move like that.
What do you think, Cian?
Yeah, I would largely agree. Because we don't really know Leo Cullen's contract situation, he tends to sign rolling year-on-year deals. I think the only way that Leo Cullen wouldn't be Leinster head coach next season, if they don't win a trophy, is that if Leo decided that enough was enough and that he had done all he could. But I don't get the sense that would be the case. Like, this season is a major transition. I don't think we can underestimate like how big of a change that they're going under in terms of the defensive system. And like I said, doing that mid-season is so difficult. There's going to be a bit of transition next season as well, ironically, because Andrew Goodman is obviously going to take over from Mike Catt as attack coach. And who are they going to get to come in there? But like that, the Leinster attack coach position is probably one of the most attractive positions in world rugby. You'd imagine the CVs that are going to be coming in the door at UCD will be pretty good. So no, like, I understand I'm not sure if Oliver's a Leinster fan or not, or maybe it's a Munster fan stirring the pot a little bit, but I don't get this sense. I'm sure some Leinster fans, their patience is running thin, but I think a lot of people are realistic. Luke is right. Look how close they've been over the last couple of years. This hasn't been a failing organisation. I don't think they'll make the same mistake twice in the URC this season. I can't see them playing a second string team when it comes to knockout rugby in the URC. That was a big mistake. I know the benefit of hindsight, but it was just a bad look as well. So I think Leinster will be going all out to win the URC this season, because they haven't won the URC obviously since the big South African teams have joined. And look, they are going to be thereabouts, I believe, come the Champions Cup final as well. I fully expect them to win again this weekend. I think they'll have a good seeding for the knockout stages. Leo Cullen was at pains to point out after the match at the weekend that home advantage doesn't always mean you're going to win in Europe. I think he had a little nod obviously to the Champions Cup final last season, but look, we know how important it is, and because Leinster have set such high standards for themselves, I think we can pick holes in it, but I think all in all they are in a good place. And when Ian Arbour's defensive system clicks, that could be what they're missing in terms of taking them to the next level.
Yeah, and I think it's a new CEO this year, new captain, a new head coach in terms of Ian Arbour to Lancaster. So I agree with you, Cian. I think unless Leinster were to get knocked out in the last 16 and the quarterfinals of the URC, maybe potentially then it could happen. But short of something like that, I don't see a change being made, even if they didn't win a trophy, unless Cullen decided to step down.
I do think as well, Will, sorry to interrupt you there. I do think that, that role that he has, I think is supposed to be there to give you the continuity, to give you, to align, how you're training players, how the organisation is run. Like, you think of Leinster, and you do think there is a Leinster way of playing rugby, I think, wouldn't you? I think that's probably fair to say. Like, if you look at clubs that kind of are, chopping and changing all the time, I think it becomes hard to really, I think Munster probably suffered from that for a little bit as well, where, there was different coaches coming in at different times, and you're kind of going, okay, well, they're changing slightly from this to that, and that's really hard for a team to play consistently well. Whereas I think, the role that Leo probably takes in there, where you get the scope to change is that kind of Nina Bar role, that Lancaster role. That's where you go, okay, well, this guy's going to move, but we know we have the continuity about, how Leinster play, what it means to be a Leinster player, what kind of players we're trying to build for the next 10 years. Leo gives you all those things, I think, Will. It's not just on the day that I think is, of course, he's the guy answering the tough questions at the end of the year, probably. But I think his role is a little bit, it's broader than just the results, I think. And I think and if you think about the time he took over the team and the job that he has done subsequently, and he was obviously heavily involved in getting Lancaster in, all these kind of things, and all these young players, of course, as well. So I think if you think about this, how strong Leinster have looked over the last 5 or 6 years compared to when he took the job probably 7, 8 years ago, that was a real transition period then as well. So I think he's done brilliant work, maybe without getting the silverware at the end, which is obviously the thing we're all looking for. I think his job, as I said, is broader.
I think you described it well when you said you think of him as kind of like a half step removed from some of the issues or some of the on-pitch stuff. Because I agree, I do see him more as a director of rugby. Obviously, Jack Neen-Aber and Stuart Lancaster before them, as maybe the senior coach, as the role says. And you said Leo Cullen's role is slightly broader than that. And obviously his job is to win trophies, but it also is to bring through these players to kind of set out Leinster's kind of philosophy.
Strategic. It's a real strategic role, I think. Well, I think he probably has the remit to do that alongside Guy Easterby, So they get to look at the grander kind of the grand scheme, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's an interesting question. Obviously, if they don't win another trophy this year, 3 years or a trophy with the squad they had would be, obviously a very big disappointment. But to move on to Connacht now, Cian, obviously, one thing I want to ask you about, they obviously disappointing defeat to Leon, level game, I think, in the second half, and then Leon pulled away. But what stood out to me was when they had their injury update for this week, and the first line was Bundee and Finlay Bealham are available for selection after being unavailable due to IRFU protocols. And I just thought I was like, Jesus, they weren't allowed to play a European game. And I just went back to look at the stats in terms of other Irish players. So, going into this last weekend, Bundee had played 4 matches since the World Cup. Gary Ringrose had played 5, and yet Gary Ringrose was allowed to play for Leinster. Bundee allegedly, or apparently wasn't allowed to play for Connacht. And then Finlay Bealham and Andrew Porter heading into last weekend. They both played 340 minutes since the World Cup. Andrew Porter was allowed to play for Leinster. Finlay Bealham wasn't allowed to play against Leon. And if you saw how that game went, the kind of tight head Dominic Robertson-McCoy was under a lot of pressure at the scrum. Tom Daly struggled a bit in the midfield against the Leon backline that, as the game wore on, created more and more chances. 2 key men in a tie game in the second half that could have maybe swung the difference. What do you make of that? I was very surprised that they weren't allowed to play. Given those numbers I read out there, it's a European game. What's going on there? What's the point of this program if you can't have your guys available for one of the biggest games?
I'm impressed with your number crunching anyway, Will, that you have the evidence to back it up. I suppose from a Connacht's point of view, what probably rubbed salt into the wounds was that the camera just kept panning to Bundee, who was on the bench, just not togged out. Like that, the fact that he was even brought to France, I think, made it even worse. It wasn't like that he was sitting at home.
He might have been injured initially. Yeah.
It wasn't like that he was sitting at home properly resting up ahead of what is now, it's not quite a dead rubber against Bristol on Friday night, but if Connacht, and that game, I know it was away in France and it's tough, but that game was winnable. That's not like a Toulouse or a Bordeaux, at home. Lyon are not one of the major powerhouses, I suppose you'd say, of French rugby. So the frustrating thing is, I obviously didn't see the update last week because they only released it this week, in terms of, stating in black and white that it was down to the IRFU's player management system. Because to me, when I saw the team named last Friday, my sense was that Connacht are like boxing clever, whatever term you want to use, that they're going, okay, Champions Cup probably isn't going to work out well for us this season, even though I think that game was winnable. And it seemed to me that they probably had one eye on the URC. But like, to contradict myself, what's the point in qualifying for the Champions Cup if you're not going to go all out for it? And it was really disappointing. I'd say it's been.
And the next URC game isn't until mid-February. Like, you know, there was a week break before this fixture last weekend. You know, there was obviously a fallow week. Then there's another fallow week after next week's fixture before the Six Nations. Bundee didn't even play for the first couple of weeks post World Cup. He was nursing injuries. Bizarre, I thought.
Yeah, I saw Pete Wilkins said that they had to do the maths and juggle it and, you know, pick what games. But in my mind, you surely play your best team last weekend in Leon. And if you do get the win, then surely there's scope to go to whoever it is that's making the call and say, we need to play these guys. Like, Finlay Bealham isn't going to be an Ireland starter barring injury in the World Cup. Bundee, barring injury this week for the Six Nations. But Bundee's obviously going to be a key player. But that game was Connacht's Champions Cup season, like last week. So I'd say it's deeply, deeply frustrating from a Connacht supporter's point of view, particularly for the ones who paid their hard-earned cash to go over there. So yeah, I don't have the answer, Will, but I think it's very frustrating.
And as I said,
I think
the
that's
numbers
shocking.
don't add up. Like, I read out the numbers. Like Andrew Porter started like every game at the World Cup, I think. Finlay Bealham was a sub, so even at the World Cup itself, he didn't play as many minutes. And then they played 340 minutes identically. Well, if my source, if the online source,
that's just wrong. That's just plain wrong. It's the cup games. You've got to give it your all. Like, you can't just be throwing matches here and there. I know like people have skinny squads and that, but there's a mentality about going away or getting a big win. You saw what you saw, like what that match against South Africa did for Munster last year. Like, going away, getting a big win, like, they're huge things for a team. They give you confidence. You know what I mean? You have to learn those habits. And I think when you go in, like, your cup, whoever's fit, your best team takes the pitch in the cup games. That's it for me. Throw your player management like for an extra 80 or 60 minutes, whatever. Like, if you're losing badly, okay, pull them off after 60 minutes or 50 minutes. You know, but I just think that's shocking. I wasn't obviously aware of that until now. But as you say, the numbers don't even match up right as well. So, you know, maybe in their mind they're thinking about, you know, later on in the league campaign. Like, I assume that's what they're thinking. They go, well, I'll save that 80 minutes for when I might really need it to help qualify. But like, if you're still live in the cup, you got to play your first 15. That's it for me. You never, like, I just can't understand how over the last, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, say the English teams, you know, they'll go, or some of the French teams even. I know the French league is very tough, but I just don't get it. Throwing matches, even in crap Leinster teams that I played in, we never went over to a league match with a crap team thinking that we were gonna, like, we always went to win every single match that we played in. Honestly, I just find it absolutely astonishing that some player minute program would dictate how you pick your team for the cup. That is completely wrong to me, and really shortchanges a very, very, you know, I think loyal supporter base. That, like, as Cian mentioned there, like, people are spending their hard-earned money to go and watch the team, like in the big cup matches in great venues that are difficult to get and expensive to get at the moment. I think it's wrong on a lot of levels, guys, and that I'm astonished by that, if that's the case.
Yeah, and if you, as I said, to touch on, if you actually watch that game, like, Connacht were well in it, and the scrum in the first half was a major issue when Leon built that early lead. Like, Finlay Bealham, you'd like to think is an international tight head, could have definitely played a part in stabilising that and cutting down on the penalty count. Bundee, as I said, plugging a big hole in midfield where Leon got some change in the back line.
Best player at the World Cup, probably. Like, yeah, you can't pick him. Madness.
Like, yeah, it's very.
They're like the Irish, the IRFU player management system rightfully gets a lot of credit for how well the players are looked after, but there are times when you wonder, are some players too well looked after? You know what I mean? And Ireland actually kind of went against it a little bit at the World Cup because they played, you know, a pretty consistent team throughout the tournament. But there are times when you're wondering,
why didn't the player management system flag it there and say, Andy, you can't do that? Like,
I know, but this is the thing. Like, is it a case where, like Luke said, someone has, and like you touching, well, the numbers don't even add up, but is someone like sitting in an office and like tallying up the games and go, no, they can't play, that's too much. I don't think it should be in black and white like that. There has to be flexibility for big games. Like, you also think that the amount of money that the Champions Cup is worth to Connacht, because if they were to get a knockout game, and okay, they would have been up against it in terms of getting it at the sports ground after having such a tough start with, but these are all factors that, you know, should come into the thinking, not just saying, oh, we'll send well, it wasn't even a second string thing, but like leave your best players out of the team for such a big game, because the game this Friday night, even if they got a bonus point, they're looking for a favour from in the Saracens game, aren't they? So it just didn't make any sense to me. For me, you have to go all out to win that game in Lyon, see which way the cards fall, and then reassess for the Bristol game on Friday night. But as it is now, they've kind of thrown in the towel and said, well, Champions Cup probably isn't going to happen for us. And they worked so bloody hard to get into it last season. And that's what's going to happen now again. They're going to be like, we have to get back into the Champions Cup. But what's the point if you're not playing your consistently strong team in it? I'd say it's very frustrating, like I said, for the supporters.
Yeah, like I know Bundee has played 4 consecutive games before last weekend, but if you look at how they fell, one was on the 22nd of December on a Friday night, and they didn't play until New Year's Day after that, so it was like a 10-day turnaround, and then you had a follow week. So while he had played 4 matches in a row, it wasn't 4 weekends in a row by any means. Like, there was good space built in there naturally. Then also, as I said, he didn't play the first few weeks post World Cup because he was nursing a couple of knocks. So
I think, guys, the way that system used to work when I was there is it's all obviously on this kind of Kitman Labs. Every meter you do, every weight rep you do, all that kind of stuff, is all tagged on this system. But like I mentioned this about Leinster last year, like there is a certain hardness and toughness that you get from playing the cup games, playing knockout rugby, that really does stand to you when you play big Six Nations games. So to my mind, what you do with Bundee here is he has to play the big games. Don't let him train. He watches video. He's out in his tracksuit. He does a weight session in the morning and he's out in his tracksuit when the team are training. Get him off his feet that way. You don't get him off his feet for the big games. Like, that's madness. That is absolute insanity to me. You got to be playing the big games to get better as a player. Simple as. And it gets you closer to, every level you go up gets you closer to Six Nations rugby too. So, coming from a league match into a Six Nations game is a way bigger jump than a cup game into Six Nations. So all of these things makes, there are levels to this thing, as they say, and I think that's a trick that's missed. I would be cutting down on training completely versus cutting out games. Just my tuppence on that.
No, it's certainly an interesting one. I think it was very pointed that it was the top line of the injury release as well. Like, they obviously wanted everyone to see that it wasn't like, because that was my first thought, Keane, like yourself. I just thought they were resting them, or they just were kind of saying, look, we're not going to get out of our group. But obviously that wasn't the case. Just before we get towards the end, Lewis Rees-Zammit, Keane, that was like a big story today. Obviously, we had Ulster losing to Toulouse as well, but Toulouse were kind of fairly comprehensive victors, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But Lewis Rees-Zammit.
We're not talking about Ulster. Sorry. Like, how heartbreaking. Sorry, I know you want to, but that was like, is this like, they must be maddening. Talking about supporters, could you imagine supporting Ulster? Honestly, I know we want to talk about like Rees-Zammit, but like, who cares about it? He's not even that great. He's just really quick. Like, Ulster, what is going on up there? Like, that was embarrassing. Some of the defensive tackling up there was a disgrace. Like, how do they do that against Leinster and then the week after? Sorry, I know I'm going on a bit of a rant here. I know you want to talk about this.
No, go for it.
No, I thought that was maddening. That was absolutely maddening. That was a big, big game for them. And there was guys getting out of the way of tackles. I know how good DuPont is, but for God's sake, like, just make some, don't let Gelange go, like, run over you. Like, you're not even there. Like, he barely had to break stride. Like, some of the decision making. I know I'm ranting here, but like, what is going on up there that they cannot put together like a couple of big games in a row? Like, you have to. I was just infuriated. I was excited. That was actually the game I was most looking forward to on the weekend, because I just thought the others would probably be dead rubbers. Sorry, obviously the Munster game was a big game, but the Ulster one, I was like, okay, let's see these guys back it up. They have to back it up just once at least. And it was absolutely infuriating watching them in the first half. Like they just, there weren't even big moments. Like it wasn't like, oh, there's 20 phases of pressure and they kind of gave in at the end. It was like off 22 dropout. I just found them maddening to watch. I know I'm not making a huge amount of sense, but they were
any of it just because Toulouse did turn it on in a big way. Like I do think that.
Well, that's not
to turn it on.
That's not like, I think we need to, especially when it comes to Ulster, we need to get away from that. Toulouse were absolutely outstanding, but like if Ulster want to be treated like the team that they think they are and they've threatened to be, then they can't get, like I'm delighted to be honest that Luke has gone on this rant, because I don't think they can get a free pass for this. I thought it was absolutely shocking.
I don't think we ever give Ulster a free pass, to be fair.
No, but like it's like I get the sense, and you know I could be wrong, but just like from little bits you see and you like play ex-players you listen to, like a bit of almost apathy towards what's going on at Ulster rather than calling it out for what it is. And it's just simply not good enough, like Luke said. Now, Toulouse were absolutely outstanding, but you can't, like you said, let Dupont have the freedom of Belfast the way he was running around. It was absolutely like crazy. And to think that they would have been working all week, like how are we going to shut this guy down? And then he just like ran riot, and, you know, give them their credit. But defensively, like this has been an issue for Ulster, I would say, since Jared Payne basically has left, that they just haven't tightened it up whatsoever. But they're like, after beating Racing and, you know, winning in the RDS, like they went on a little bit of a run, but like you always just feared that this could happen again, because they must be one of the most inconsistent teams in Europe. It's so frustrating, like Luke said. And if we're talking about Connacht fans being frustrated, I think Ulster fans have every right to be pissed off with what they're being served up when the big games come up, because I guarantee you we'll have this conversation again this season about Ulster. They might go on a little run in the URC. Their Champions Cup looks dead and buried. But when it comes to the crunch in the playoff games, I bet you we'll be having these same conversations.
Well, like... I agree with what you both said. It was a very poor performance. Defensively, they were shredded. But Toulouse are the best team in the tournament. Like, Ulster, what are they? Where would they be ranked in the tournament? 18th, 19th in the tournament? Like, why would we expect them to beat them?
At home, Will. They just beat Leinster. Leinster are the other best team in the competition so far. No, sorry. There was guys getting out of the way of tackles. Like that is not, no matter
I'm
who
not defending it. I'm just... There's a huge chasm in class between the two teams.
There isn't really like it.
There is.
No,
there
rugby,
is. Look at
rugby is not. Sorry, no. Rugby of all games. If you physically show up, Will, it should be a tighter match at home. And Ulster are not that bad. They've loads of internationals in that rugby team. I just know I'm not letting them away with that. There's no way that's good enough. There was guys getting out of the way of tackles, like afraid of getting hurt on your home turf. Like, come on, like get a grip of yourself. Like I thought it was actually, some of it was a bit shameful. Like I was a bit like, are you serious? Did you miss that tackle? Like, guys thinking that like brilliant. Yeah, they're a very good rugby team. They're not that good though. And you know, I just think, you know, physically they thought that guys would just go down and wouldn't go down without a fight, that they could just kind of lean into a tackle and that'd be okay. That is not what gets you, you know, that's not what closes the gap against good teams. And Toulouse are a good team. But they were made to look like absolute superheroes at times. And I was really gutted for, I think, the coaching staff too, because I think it's the players. I think the players, like, you have to have a standard that you hit every week. You saw how physical they were against Leinster. They just disappeared at times. Like, you have to want to hurt guys in tackles, because they won't go down. They're not going to go down easy. These are French internationals. Like, they're not going to go down easy. You've got to get them down. You've got to want it. You've got to want to put in a performance in front of your own supporters. And I have been really gentle on Ulster the last couple of years, because I feel like they're, you know, I want to see them do well. They're going through a tough patch. No, I'm not giving them a pass after the weekend. I thought they were shocking. And they made, like, if you think about Dupont, it wasn't even like he did some brilliant stuff himself. You know, the one where he switches, he drags, I think, McCluskey along with him with the change of pace and the drop off inside. Like, it's terrible defence on the inside, but that was a lovely bit of play. The other ones were all just brilliant support running from guys who made breaks. Like, it wasn't all Dupont. They were missing tackles on guys they should be tackling, like basic defensive errors. And Dupont we know what he's like. He is, any sniff of an opportunity, he is absolutely mesmeric. He's just there at everything, at every good thing that happens, he's there. But if you allow good things to happen with laziness and with softness, he looked like a super. He looked like the best player in the world, no doubt. He is the best player in the world. But they let him look like the best player in the world easily on the weekend. Shocking stuff.
The bigger ramifications are, like, Ulster supporters, I think, would have been annoyed that they haven't had more representation in the Ireland team over the last few years. But that kind of performance is just ammunition for Andy Farrell when it comes to picking Ireland squads, when it comes to picking an Ireland team. That's why certain guys aren't going to get a look in, because if you're shipping, 48 points at home, albeit to a very strong team, then he can just point to that and say, well, you're clearly not at the standard. If that's what you're doing at home in a top-level European game, what are you going to be like at Test rugby? And that's the cold, hard reality for Ulster, because I think the reason, and I don't want to put words in Luke's mouth, but because I think the reason why we're both being so critical is because they do have talent in that squad, and a lot of that talent is going to pass them by in terms of their careers. I think there's been a few guys over the last couple of seasons who have just stagnated. Now, whether that's down to the tactics and the game plan, I don't know. But a couple of years ago, we were talking about a lot of these guys in terms of being in the Irish equation. And again, I could be proven wrong tomorrow when the squad's being named, but I'd be shocked if we saw some of those guys who I'm thinking of who were in the mix a couple of years ago and now have just fallen down the pecking order completely. So, like I said, their Champions Cup looks like it's possibly over, barring a major turn of events this weekend. And for Ulster, that's just not good enough at all to not even make if it happens, to not make the knockout stages of the Champions Cup. No matter where you put them, Will, in your power rankings, I would agree. I don't think they're not in Toulouse's class, but I wouldn't say they'd be too far in the next rung below them.
Well, they were trashed by Bath as well. Like, I know they beat Racing well, but like, the performance was terrible. I don't disagree with that, but I'm just saying, like, they're arguably the fourth best team in Ireland. Like, they're playing the best team in the tournament. Yes, they got hammered, and yes, it was a terrible performance. But like, like what should we?
Is there 10 internationals, and did they feel 10 international guys? Not seasoned
internationals. Yeah, the guys with caps, but they've had caps and been turfed out of the squad. Like,
I don't know. I think if you put in a big physical performance, it's still, you should be bloody hard to beat at home. And Ulster have always been unbelievably hard to beat at home. No matter who played against them, it was always a tough place to go and play, even when they had way worse teams than that out. And, Toulouse, pretty cold conditions up there. I don't know. If you got stuck into them, there's definitely a part of me that thinks that should have been a one-score game anyway. Ulster are always great at home. I just felt like that we were going to let them off the hook there. There's no way I'm letting them off the hook. That was not good enough on the weekend. There was guys getting out of the way of tackles, and that, to my mind, is unacceptable at home. Yeah, we have to call that out where we see it, because they were so good against Leinster. They physically were brilliant, and they were up for it. You can see there's fight in that team, but you can't go from that high to that low in the space of a week, and they do it regularly. So, no, not this week are they getting away with it with me, no.
I had a quick look. I think they had, albeit they're not all current international, but 13 of the 15 starting team for I make it are international players or have been capped. So,
yeah, but like one of them is a current international. Henderson is none.
They have a World Cup winner, Lou said.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, Kitch.
Tom Stewart is probably going to be in the Ireland squad tomorrow because Rob Herring is out.
For a second, I was like, when did Ireland win the World Cup? Who are you talking about?
That'll be, sorry, you might be right on that one, but that tackle he missed, I don't care if he got the try off the back of that maul. That was shocking. That was really bad. Like, you heard some of the guys, some of the Ulster supporters, are like ex-Ulster players, like they couldn't even forgive him for that one. Do you know what I mean? It's rare that you'd be criticizing guys that even they couldn't help. That was really bad. For a young player, it was a really bad look missing that tackle.
Lewis Rees Sammet, then we could finally get out to Lewis Rees Sammet after our Ulster detour. It's funny, Luke, we actually had this conversation off air a few weeks ago in the studio before we kicked off, just about rugby players playing NFL and like if how easy it would be for like a good winger to play wide receiver or something like that. It looks like he's going down that route. It's funny, I saw an interview he did today saying that his dad always loved NFL and he wants to do his dad proud. I'm like, surely he liked rugby as well, though. You're playing for Wales at the moment. What did you make of it? It's a very, I find it a bit strange. Like, I know Christian Wade tried to do it, but he was kind of at the back end of his career. Reece Salmond is 22, is he 23? Prime of his rugby career. I know Wales is in a bit of transition, obviously, financially as well as on the pitch. So maybe he wants to do it for those reasons. But what are your thoughts?
I think it's a mistake. Yeah, I think he won't. I think he won't make an impact. He doesn't look like he looks quick for a rugby player, but he'd be slow for NFL, I'd imagine. So yeah, I don't think he'll make it. I think he doesn't look big enough to play running back, and I think he doesn't look like he looks maybe a little bit too tall to play in the slot. They have those slot receivers like Edelman and these guys who can kind of turn really quickly in and out of things, and they've got like unbelievable hands, like won't drop anything. Yeah, I don't know where he plays. I think he looked like a guy who'd be kind of stuck for position because there's no way he's a wide receiver. Like those corners will lead him up, I'd say. And I don't think I just can't see it. They're just freaky athletes over there, and he's a good athlete, but he's not a freaky athlete, So I wish him all the best with it. Like, it's great that he's taking a shot, but I think he's, is he a cert in the Welsh team? He might be. I think he probably is a cert, but no, he hasn't always been.
Players,
he hasn't always been. No, he hasn't always been a cert in there. He's made some mistakes, and I think I don't know. Yeah, I don't think he's an unbelievable rugby union player. I don't think he's got all that figured out. So I don't know why he's making the move across. It has to be financially motivated, in my opinion. I just don't see where. I don't see how that would be a life. No, who am I to say it? But I don't know. It doesn't look to me like that would ever have been a realistic kind of pathway for someone to be dreaming about as a kid, I think was the line that he used in the statement. So it seems like an odd move to me. I think it's a mistake because I think he could have a brilliant Welsh rugby career, and he needs to be in Wales camp, because I think the Welsh provinces or regions are all over the place. I know he's in Gloucester as well, but that route's kind of closed off to him, and I think Gloucester aren't a great team. So he needs to be in Wales camp to really improve as a rugby player. And I think, I don't know, any time out of that, I think is regression to me. It's not actually, he's not going to be improving. So I don't know. Doesn't make sense to me at all. Yeah. I don't know. Any thoughts? Am I way off? I know it's tough in Welsh rugby and in Gloucester and stuff, but I don't know. I just feel like he's making a mistake. I think he could be a great rugby union player, and he's got the Lions tour, that possibly, next year as well. So misses out on that probably. I don't know.
I think it says a lot about the state of Welsh rugby at the moment. Like Warren Gatland, I think, said in his press conference today that he only found out shortly before his squad was announced, which kind of shows some of the maybe dysfunction behind the scenes.
Did he only find out? Was he only offered the position on that player pathway a week ago or something like that, or is it
on Sunday? Right? On Sunday is the talk, because the Wales squad was actually delayed today in terms of being announced, and I saw a couple of the Welsh journalists were kind of wondering what was going on, but I don't think anyone would have predicted that one of their star players was going off to this NFL like pathway or whatever it is. And like, maybe you guys will know more. Like, I have to admit, I'm one of the few people who don't follow NFL, but I've seen a lot of, people say that, he's only doing it for the money. But like, my reading of it, he's going for what is essentially a trial. He doesn't have a contract. I'm sure the trial, like, he'll get money, but I don't think he's going for a big wage here unless he makes it. Is that right?
So someone was telling me today that I think the NFL cover the costs of this international player development kind of thing, and then he will try out for various teams. And I think if you actually make a roster, seemingly the minimum, payment you get is like $700,000 if you make a roster. And even if you're on a practice squad, it can be like $200,000 or $300,000. So like, if he makes a squad, he'll still be making like decent money, but whether he can make a squad even, like, they're very different skills. Be playing wide receiver, and playing rugby winger. I know there's a lot of crossover abilities, maybe having pace, having good hands, but if you ever see the receivers running routes, it's very different to how like a winger runs with the ball in hand. So I would be astounded if he, like, what's the best case scenario? That he's like wide receiver 6 on the worst team in the NFL? Or, like, I don't see it. Like, he's only going to be playing for the Kansas City Chiefs and catching touchdowns from Mahomes or something.
Yeah, like the way I look at it is, he's still a young guy. He's been offered a chance, potentially a chance in a lifetime. Why not go and see if it works out? I know what Luke's saying. He's not going to become a better rugby player, but I still think he can come back and he would probably pick up a very good contract in Europe, certainly. Maybe even he might go to Japan. Like the Wales squad for the Six Nations was named today. It's hard to get excited about some of the stuff, some of the names you see in there. He's playing in an awful Gloucester team. So rugby at the moment, I'd say, isn't that exciting. So I think like if he goes off, like he gives it a go, fair enough. If it doesn't work out, I still think he's got plenty of time to have a decent rugby career. But again, without, like I said, I don't follow the NFL, I don't watch it, but he's going from being a relatively big fish in a small pond to being a tiny fish in an enormous pond. I mean, like the level of talent and athlete that you're talking about who are going to be at those trials and stuff is going to be off the charts. So something special is going to have to happen for him to make one of the squads, like you're saying, Will. So it's hard to see how it's motivated by money either. So we'll see how it works out. But I'm excited to see if it works out. I have my doubts, like I said, but I don't think we're going to see an Irish player be doing it anytime soon. But that's probably because we lack the fast twitch fibers for it.
Well, we had a punter playing for the Packers in the playoffs the weekend. He's from Enniskerry, so
that is where I think if you're coming from our game, punter, that like Raj. Remember Raj at the
it's like rumors about really Raj. Want to pack in rugby just to kick the ball. That's your only thing is to come on and like kick the ball.
You
like,
do need a good one of them though. You really know if you've got a bad one. You wish him all the best. Like he's clearly taking a punt on this. You just wonder, has he really considered, how good an athlete these guys are? Like they're so specialized and they're just freaky good. Like it's kind of almost like, I'm not going to say it's arrogant to think you could go across and do it, but these kids have been doing it since they're 5 years old, more often than not. Like to be able to think you could just transfer across, leaving aside all the athletic ability that they have. Like it's such a technical game as well, You hear about like even people who've like smart people, talking about trying to pick up a playbook and understand it. People who've been in college, who are, who've been playing football since they're like kind of 5, 6, 7, like being able to pick up these things, like it's unbelievably technical to play at the top level in most of the teams as well. So it's not just, I don't think it's like an up and down the sidelines kind of thing being a wide receiver. Like it's pretty tricky trying to figure out all the different calls and all that too as well. So it's not just a physical thing and a skill thing. It's an upward hill, I'd imagine. But look, we wish him well. Anyone who takes a shot, you like seeing people take shots at things and back themselves. But I don't know. I feel like he's plenty of. He could be a great rugby player, and I don't know. It feels like a real crucial time in your growth to be giving up.
Yeah, just to finish up, we have a new slot in the left wing. It's called our left wing moment of the week in association with Bank of Ireland. And this week I'm going to pick. It was the last game of the weekend of what was a very enjoyable Championship Cup weekend. It was just Bordeaux shredding Saracens. The moment was just, I suppose, any of those first half tries where I think Saracens were shell-shocked just how good Bordeaux were and how much the backline clicked. Obviously, overseen by Noel McNamara, who we'll be familiar with over here, coached schools level, the under-20s team, possibly in the frame for the Leinster attack coach role next year. He's overseeing a backline with Matthew Jalabert, Maxime Luchu, Peno, Louis Billy Beret, who will all probably feature against Ireland in a few weeks' time. But just the rugby they played was just breathtaking. And to see Saracens, a once proud European powerhouse, just absolutely blitzed by it, just blew me away as well. So that's my moment of the week. Keane, what about you?
I know what Luke's going for, so I'm going to share the love. I've picked a moment out of the Leinster game. My favourite thing in rugby, and you've definitely heard me say this before, is a set piece move just working to absolute perfection. Even more so when it works without a defender being able to lay a glove on you. So for that reason, I picked Jordan Larmour's second try against Stade Francais at the weekend. Beautiful move. I was asking Andrew Goodman about it yesterday, and he said they'd run it all week in training, but they actually didn't play the inside ball that Ronan Kelleher played, that they'd been going to the outside. So for Ronan Kelleher and Jordan Larmour to have concocted that and basically have played the picture that unfolded in front of them, I thought was just brilliant. I thought it was a sensational try, and it must be so satisfying when you spend that much time in training working on it and it works to perfection and a defender isn't even able to lay a glove on you. So that's my moment of the week, Luke.
I thought when you mentioned the Leinster game that you were going to go with Ryan Baird's giant run from his own 22, which we've seen him do before, but it's always great to see him in full flight. Okay, Luke, you have the last word then. What was your moment of the week?
I went with Zebo's try. I just thought it was a critical moment in the game. I thought the way he hid for any winger took me so long to figure this out about the positions you should try and kind of find yourself in. If you watch him, he kind of drifts right in behind Crowley, knowing that he wants the chip to go into that little space on the inside. Now, it was excellent execution by Crowley as well, but I just loved how Zebo. You can see Zebo calling it out to him, drifting in behind him, knowing that he's going to be coming back inside him once the chip is made. Beautiful bit of play. Lovely communication to spot the gap in behind the defence, and brilliant execution to hang on to it at a big moment. I think he's been brilliant for Munster when he's been in the jersey this year. The critical thing for him now is just staying fit. But that was my moment of the match and moment of the week. Yeah, I think he's a special player, I think, when he's on form, and loving watching him at the moment. So hopefully he gets his place in that Ireland squad.
Well, there were plenty of great moments last weekend, and hopefully we'll get plenty of great moments on the final round of Champions Cup pool games coming this weekend. That's all we have time for on the latest episode of the Left Wing podcast. I would like to thank Luke and Cian for joining me tonight. We will have another podcast after the Ireland squad announcement, so keep an eye out for that. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.